Hello, we are going to dive into another great topic about those that have been struggling with church hurt. So, you may have personally experienced or know someone that has personally experienced not wanting to return to church because they've been hurt by a church, they've experienced some kind of rejection, or maybe they weren't given the opportunity or resources that they needed. And so they just don't feel like church is the place for them to be. Maybe they've joined an online church or they've just disconnected altogether. It's really common in today's era that we see a lot more people who just feel like church is not for them. They believe in God, but as far as church, it's just not really something that they have really dove back into, and we saw a huge dip in it after COVID. A lot of people just didn't return. They just found that actually removing themselves from the situation was a lot less toxic for them, and so they just couldn't really justify coming back. There could be a series of political or social issues that could be at the cause, but we are specifically going to dive into some of those impressions that can occur between volunteers or leadership and people in their first impression, and how sometimes that can impact whether or not someone returns to a church and how to kind of navigate around those issues. So let's dive in. The fears of an individual hurt by the church. How can we approach hurt church stigmas? So the first is the fear of not feeling seen. It's a really unfortunate thing, regardless of the size of your church, that there is a huge, I would say, minority that has sometimes become a majority of people who say that I've just never been invited to a small group, or I've never been acknowledged by the pastor. I honestly can't say that I know anybody at the church or that anyone has tried to get to know me. It's really unfortunate for me when I hear someone say, I've been coming here for a year and a half and you're the first person that's ever really asked anything about me. That truly breaks my heart, because that is just such a loss of opportunity to connect and help people to grow. A year and a half in the life of a Christian is such a huge formation of time that growth and just great personal experiences can occur within the churches, and we're just missing that opportunity. So how do we get past that obstacle? So if you have hospitality leadership, and this may be an on-staff person, this may be just a head volunteer that's been managing it for some time, I just want to dive into a couple of things that are really important. It's important to have that person identify that they need to see the importance of Jesus in everyone. And so what we can kind of do is look past one person to see someone who's more important, or someone that they have known for a really long time, a friend or a family member or a high tither, someone that just, that person feels you look over the shoulder to say hi to someone that is more important to you. And so when you are greeting someone, when you are talking to someone, they need to have your full attention. And even if someone interrupts and goes, oh, hey, good morning, blah, 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 that you take a moment and just go, hey, give me 1 second, I'm talking, and just, I'll be right with you. And we make sure that the person that you are currently talking to doesn't feel like you've disregarded them for somebody else. Really important for life group leadership. Maybe you call them small groups, maybe you call them discipleship groups, whatever it may be, that you've created particular demographics that meet the needs of a majority of your people that go to your church. And I've said this a million times, I'll say it a million times more. It's really important to poll your church. It's really important to understand where they are in life, what's going on with them, what are some of their priorities, what are some of their needs, so that you know how to best to serve them. Because just, kind of guessing and assuming that you kind of know what they're experiencing and what's happening in their world doesn't really help us to be able to really micro focus in on where their need is and to help them grow past whatever obstacle they're currently in. And greeters, just kind of going back to that, make eye contact and communicate with those attending alone, especially if you see someone that's sitting alone. You may think like, oh, it's super awkward for me to go and walk over there. Not at all. I go up to people all the time and I'm like, hey, are you here by yourself? Do you want to come sit with us? That's like something that I find to almost be endearing about a person. If you're willing to come to church alone and if you're a strong enough individual, those have sometimes become our strongest volunteers because they're just already taking the initiative to come to church without their family or without friends or without a significant other. And so those people tend to be ones that are to me stronger and can handle a lot more. And I've watched growth happen there and it be really, really effective in the church in the long term. So don't disregard anyone that comes alone. So a fear that's commonly talked about is just not feeling understood. And not feeling understood comes from this culture that we live in America, which is really a part of like, there's no time to stop. There's always something that you need to be doing. There's always someone somewhere you needed to be 10 minutes ago. There's always someone else you need to call or respond to or whatever it may be, something that is drawing your attention away from your current situation. There is no relaxed time. There is no downtime. And so when someone is trying to express to you what their stakes are, and I call them the stakes because how high are the stakes? For me, you may tell me a crisis into your situation. I think this is a baby crisis. This is like nothing. But to you, it's a very big deal. It's something that you're experiencing right now. And then there's other times when maybe I'm like, why aren't you sensing the urgency about this particular situation? Someone else is like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, I've seen worse. And those kind of like passive statements can be really damaging. They can be really damaging to not understanding that someone else feels like this is really important, that this is very vital. And so how do we work with people who have different high stakes? And so we really need to just be good listeners in that moment. I say that a lot. But the second part of that is putting on that poker face, not being emotionally reactive. Don't roll your eyes. Don't be passive about it. Don't be like, I've seen it. I've seen it all. You know, like I've seen this a million times. There's a way to connect people to feeling reassured, but not disregarded. And so those two things are really different. And the objective may be the same, but how you approach it can identify whether or not you're going to hit your objective. And so, again, don't be shifting your eyes while talking to that person, looking over their shoulders and being like, oh, yeah, I'll pray for you. Like, I got to go, or I got somewhere to be, or, you know, like, could you shoot it to me in an email? If they feel that it's very important, then you need to give them that attention. You can set yourself a time limit because sometimes people can be lengthy, and I totally understand that. You're like, I don't have 3 hours to listen to someone just like tell me all of their emotional feelings, especially if you're not an emotional feelings person like I am. But I can say, hey, you know what? I've got 15 minutes before I've got to pick up my kiddo. Let's sit down. I want to hear about it. And if you need more time, you know, I want to be able to give you that. And I want to be able to give you my attention. I'm just letting you know that I've got a solid 15 before I genuinely have to pick up my son. That clarification of like, I'm not blowing you off. I'm not running out on this conversation. I'm setting the boundary up front of saying like, I really genuinely do have to do something, but I want to give you my attention while I can. And what I'm saying is I can give you attention for 15 minutes. And then know when to fold. Like when someone is coming to you with a problem consistently over and over, or it just seems like this person always has a problem, or you just don't feel like you're connecting with this person and it's just not a right fit, that's when I'd say it's time to fold. And folding can look like two different things. One, it can be that this person has no intention to grow and they just are addicted to that empathy that I talk about. And so we want to put them with someone who could potentially help them to grow, that maybe connects with them on a different level. Maybe it's a background issue. Maybe it's a connection, tone, approach. You know, we want to give them those resources. But the other thing too is that, you know, another way of folding is to realize that this is becoming toxic. And so we really have to set parameters and knowing, okay, how do I allow the Spirit to do its job instead of me feeling like I have to fix this person. And where the toxicity can come into is the dependency. There can create a codependency between the person that is trying to help someone and someone who is trying to seek help. And so we can the pendulum will swing too far in one direction or the other. Sometimes we either don't give people the time of day, or we start to take the replacement of the Savior. We start to take the replacement of the dependency that they have to set, specifically that we want them to set on the Spirit and Jesus and through their relationship with God. So how do we balance that? When you see that that person is becoming too dependent on you and not dependent enough on God, that's when you know, okay, something's got to give. And you really start to only then respond with scripture. Really then set those parameters of like, we're going to strictly talk about what the word says, because the more you kind of engage in those emotional aspects and kind of justify how they feel, the more it perpetuates more feelings and more justifications, and it becomes this addiction to empathy. So a fear of not feeling safe or protected. So unfortunately, we live in a culture where there's a lot of different instances that happen on church grounds. But it could also be that there aren't parameters or boundaries around leadership or communication or just people volunteering together. And so they feel like, I just don't feel like I'm in a safe environment to be in this. And it could be really just a culture of attitude. And I find that more so than anything. And so I do talk, and we do have other subject matters specific to abuses and things that happen on church grounds. But in this particular instance, I'm going to talk specifically about the things that people say or do that take the place of the narrative of the ministry. And so sometimes you have a person that has a very loud personality, someone that has a very vivacious, like, I'm here, I've arrived. And so they tend to be kind of almost like the spokesperson of a particular ministry. It could be a ministry within your nonprofit or within your church organization. But what I find is that person kind of sets the tone for what your church or ministry is. And so if they're very aggressive, or they're very judgy, or they're very cliquey, or they say something that, is could be misconstrued, what tends to happen is people lean on this narrative that, oh, that must be the stance that the church is taking. That must be the stance of what leadership feels or believes. And what tends to happen a lot of times is that leadership has no idea these conversations are even happening. They have no idea that this person has just taken initiative to feel very comfortable to pursue conversations and topic points that are not within their job parameters or boundaries. And so you lose people, and you're going, hang on a second, like, why are we losing people in this particular sect of people? And it could be that you have to take a temperature check with who your volunteers are and how they are reacting, responding, and engaging with people coming through the door. There should be some level of accountability always, regardless if you're at the very top or the very bottom of the leadership standpoint. And if you are just a volunteer, there should be an observation time, where you watch and you see, like, okay, what are some of the things they're saying? What are some of the feedback that we're receiving? Like, what are some of the tools that we need to help them to fine tune, and where can they grow as an individual? We don't just kind of like throw them in the water and they're like, okay, I hope you can sink or swim. And also, I'm assuming you have all the resources that you need. Someone can always have space to grow. And so we always want to help even our most educated volunteers take it to the next level and learn something that they don't know, and a way to implement that into their system so that that they are representing your ministry well, that they are a good face to the brand, that they are being a statement and a story that best describes what you want for your organization. So a fear of feeling judged. Feeling judged and being judged are two very different things. And I have to say that in today's culture, just unfortunately, there can be a feeling that comes from almost like a non-spoken pressure or a non-spoken reaction. And I kind of go through this in my topic when I talk about gossip and kind of how people have different ways of identifying how they handle other people's life experiences. But in this particular just slide, I'm going to hyper focus in on pursuing to redirect instead of condemn. I think what happens is that we're very, especially within women, when we set these expectations of what a woman of God should look like, should sound like, should act like, should dress like, all of these things that we just naturally assume that people go from being a non-believer immediately falling into our set expectations of what you should be as a Christian. There's this huge gap in the middle that I think is where sanctification lives. And that's the process of the Holy Spirit, allowing that person to learn in their own time what is appropriate and kind of learning and navigating through this new lifestyle that may be violently different than what they grew up with, violently different from how they had been living before. And so it can seem really overwhelming for them. It can be really scary for them to try to figure out, like, I don't know how to do this church thing. I've never done this church thing before. And so when we come in and we kind of start with our little like side looks and our side conversations and things like that, there's no room for correction because we haven't built any connection with that person yet. It's a very Montessori way of approaching things, but in the Montessori way of education, we allow people to go at their own pace. And some people are going to go faster than others, and some people are going to catch on to things faster than others. And some are going to lag behind. But in that process, we help them to go, okay, this tool set isn't working for you. Let's try a different tool set. Let's try a different approach. Let's try a different hands-on tool to try to get you to learn it. And so in that process, in Christendom, that's the sanctification process. Is the Holy Spirit is using the tool set that best speaks through that person to identify some areas in their life that they can grow. You can't just assume that overnight a person is going to have a completely different set of attributes that they had before, a completely different set of lifestyle skills and habit training that they didn't have before. So we really need to build that connection, just be truly an environment that brings in lovingly, but doesn't stop there, because that's the other pendulum swing in the church, is that we love people so much that they stay in their sin, they stay in their lifestyle because they think, well, I don't have to change. God just loves me the way that I am. And again, it really is about the Holy Spirit working through that sanctification process. It's that middle category. It's that time of waiting. It's that time of testing. It's the time of being able to endure the worst of our spiritual warfare, when, Satan's trying everything you can to get you to go back to your old lifestyle. And so when you have that connection, correcting feels loving. It feels like a redirection. It's like, hey, you know what? Maybe we don't do that. But what we can do is we can do this, like I've used this in my life that has worked better for me when it comes to having to deal with whatever it may be, anxiety or depression or, whatever their obstacle is. And maybe they had a worldly thing that they did to kind of suppress those emotions when they occurred. But you help them to go, hey, like, this is a way that I do things. It may not be the best fit for you, but it is an option. And I know some of the other girls have also dealt with some anxiety, or for guys, maybe like, hey, if you're having, sleep issues or, whatever it may be, like, these are things that I've implemented. And so it's a time process. It's a commitment to time. I always say anything in ministry, anything with lifestyle changes or habit changes, it's a commitment to time. So a fear of feeling used. This is typically a church hopper. It's just somebody who's coming over from another church. Maybe they have a fundamental background in ministry. Maybe they've just been in the church for a really long time. Maybe they grew up in the church, whatever it may be. But they have a concept of some level of volunteering or giving of their time. And what we tend to do sometimes in some churches, is we jump straight from, great, you've been dipped in the water, you came out a new person, and we're going to put you straight to work. And so we try to look for ways to immediately plug them into serving. They're not there yet. They haven't gone through that time of testing. They haven't gone through that sanctification process. They haven't gone through all of the things that they need to have this skill set, the attributes, the just the positive things that they can successfully engage and conquer with. And that's why scripturally it says that leadership should not be new Christians for a series of reasons, pride and amongst other things. And so we really want to build that relationship with that person first, knowing who they are. I once went to a church where I kept getting text messages to serve and to help with the hospitality team. And finally, I had to send them a note and say, I don't know how y'all haven't noticed, but I haven't come to this church for like a year and a half. And you guys keep asking me to like serve in children's ministry. That's a problem, because you need to know who your volunteers are. You need to notice if someone's left the church. You need to notice if someone's disconnected, especially before you ask them to engage in any kind of time commitment to serve. Give them an opportunity to grow. I think that we keep volunteers engaged longer when we help them to be more successful, when we help them to grow in where they're at and figure out where are you and where would you like to be? How can we help you to best get there? In business, this really helps in developing future leadership within business, because we say, okay, you're coming in at this entry level. Where do you want to go? So that we can put you on the right trajectory to get there. So we can help you with the tool sets to be successful in that. And sometimes we get too comfortable in Christendom where we just kind of find someone, throw them in a place, and they're like, but they're really good at serving in that area. And you're like, great. But, our goal is to raise up new people and to help people to grow. It's never a comfortable place that we need to live in. And so when we're really comfortable and we're like, oh, I've just been doing this for, 15 years, that's too long. Like, that's just too much. That's not what God intended. And I understand and I appreciate people who have a desire to serve in one area, but there should be a level of growth within that area. So just make sure that if you've placed someone and they're really, really good at what they do, that there's a place for them to grow and there's a place for them to go from there. Because like maybe you're like head over hospitality instead of just a greeter, and like eventually you grow in that area. Like that there is just a goal set, because that is really what we want people to do. We don't want them to become stagnant. That's just an unhealthy thing for any Christian, is to grow stagnant. So take that into consideration and then connect them to ministries that highlight their strengths. And so we just never want to be like, oh, warm body method, like you over there, can you like help with kids? Like, what if they hate children? Or like, what if they're just really not good at it? So people can feel burnt out because they're placed to volunteer in areas that they don't have a connection to. And they're like, I feel used every single week. I'm doing this thing that I hate doing. I don't have a passion for it. I don't even think I have a gift for it, but I just keep doing it because they keep asking. So it's really important that we are engaged and take temperature checks. Again, going back to polling and asking people like, what is something that you're passionate about? Or what do you feel like that God is calling you towards? That can help you to get at least a launching pad of where you want to take someone. Okay. Feeling neglected. I'm going to share with you some facts about, and I say facts because these are more than feelings. And I think that whenever we talk about specific groups of people have feelings or an impression that is not helpful. So I've heard things kind of like, well, young people don't tithe, so they're not really our priority. I've heard all kinds of silly things, like singles ministry is just exhausting because they all marry each other, so we just don't do it anymore. You have to know your people and serve them well. And what I want to go over is what the fact of that source that you get from the experience of diving into and putting time and energy into maybe a group of people that you wouldn't typically think gives you anything. And it's more than just tithing. It's more than just contribution in the way that you would think of it. And so I think that when we watch kids really start to gravitate towards the Lord and learn the things of the Lord, start to implement some of these resources into their lives and start to learn the little scriptures and all these kinds of things, it gives us a source of hope, especially as adults who are infiltrated every single day with this is going on and that's going on. And can you believe this is happening in schools now and all of this negativity? When we are diving in with little kids and we see that look, that expression of when they say Jesus, then we really get to have this experience of hope with them. And so when we get with our teens, they just have an energy. How many times have you said to yourself, man, I wish I had like 1/10 of the amount of energy that they do? They do. They have an energy that gives us life. They have an energy that really keeps us motivated and keeps us energized and keeps us looking towards the future. And with our college kids, it's a source of contribution. It's a source of opportunity to give back to society, to send these college students into workplaces, hopefully with a positive foundation that is Christ-centered. It's our contribution to society. And with singles, it is a source of growth. It is a source of connecting people and having them grow their families within the church and living out and putting out into the world positive family influence. And our elders are a source of wisdom. They're a great place to go for knowledge and wisdom for a time that we haven't lived yet. And they're just a wealth of peace because they're like, I've already lived through it, you know? So a verse that comes to mind when I think about just this particular development of who we focus on is not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. And so don't think about just what are ministries I want to have in my church or what are ministries I want to focus on. I think it is important for you to know where your strengths and your weaknesses are, but to implement people who do have a passion for these particular groups of individuals because they are really, really effective into the success of a nonprofit, the success of a church. And they're really great contributors. Young people are really great contributors. As the first to volunteer, they can do things that most of us as we grow older just can't. And that is sometimes so much more vital than whether or not they can write a big check. Specialty programs. Restoring is things like addiction, marriage, family, etc. Just helping to restore what is already fundamentally there. Then you have your healing category, which is your cancer support, hospital visitation, abuse, things that are talking about the physicality. Maybe you're setting up just a food train for when people are sick, but you have that healing part or category in your programs. And then your caring program category, which would be like divorce care, widow care, special needs. And whenever you have a lack in one of these fields, one of these areas, maybe you're a smaller church and you're like, we just don't have all the people to service all of these. You might just have one that is called restoration or one that is just called healing or one that's just called caring. And you may have to just put them all together for a little bit until you kind of raise up other people to lead those individual ministries. But when you don't have them, they will go to a church that does have those resources, especially with things with like special needs, implementing special needs resources. And I do have another category that we're building out right now that is ways for churches to be able to help with people who do have children who have special needs. And, addiction resources, they may not be in your church. They may be a nonprofit organization that works in your community. And so you can connect them with someone else that does that very, very well. You're like, we don't do that here, but I can send you to the right place. And so knowing who manages these other support groups, like I said, maybe it's not happening in your church, but you know exactly where to send them if they come to you and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love that you have shown him as you have helped his people and continue to help them. I think we have to be really patient with people that are experiencing church hurt, because it's a process to rebuild that trust. It's a process to regain and show them that the stigma that was set before, maybe by a church who didn't handle something well, isn't your church. It's kind of like jumping into a marriage with someone who's been married before, and you kind of having to remind them, like, don't make me pay for the things that happened in your last marriage. I'm not that person. And so it's the same kind of feeling that you feel like when you come into a new church. It's like we're kind of having to rebuild that trust, and just having your heart open to the idea that they may not be all in on day one. But if you're consistent and you don't give up on them, and you don't just kind of go, oh, okay, that person's never going to come around. And it's a long-term game. I say this with everything that we dive into. It's a commitment to time. Give that commitment to time and show them over time that you're different. You will see some really positive results that connect them to people who care. And that's really what people look for more than anything. It isn't all the splash. It isn't all of the, drama. Definitely being innovative is good, but what they look for more than anything is connection. Sometimes even our well-established, resourced churches lose people time and time again because there's just no connection happening within the people, and they're not really building a relationship with other people who are living their lifestyle and being able to connect and grow alongside them as a community. So make sure that you have those resources to help people who are experiencing that hurt in the past, and just being able to show that you're different. You can't fix what happened back then, but you can show them difference now. And so if there's an off chance that they come through your doors, great. And if you're like, how do we even get them in the doors? Like, show some of these things on social media. Show some of the resources that you have. Show some of the greeting faces. Show some of the support groups that you have. And people go, oh, I've been looking for a resource like that. I've been looking everywhere. I had no idea this has been here all along. Make sure you're communicating those resources that you have and those differences that set you apart from other people, because that really does make a difference. Don't just talk about your, Bible study topics and things like that, because everybody's going to have a teacher. Talk about the specific ways for people to connect that are different. What does your college group look like? What does your kids, festivities look like? And, just all of those different things that are back in that slide, reference back to that slide and say, do we have something in each of these categories? And are we communicating well to everything that we have in each of these categories? And if not, how can we increase that? Because that really does build the trust back. It gets people through the door, getting, okay, I'm going to try it. And that try period, that small millisecond of time that you have to make a first impression, make sure that you reference back to the beginning of this, that you've implemented all of the positive things that we talked about that really help people to stay connected and engaged. I hope this was helpful to you. Stay with us as we do some more.